All right, so back in the shop working on the Jake. So we've got today, the plan was to remove the front thrust nut as well as the front bearing plate. And we wanted to get the front nose case off. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the case off, but we were able to get the thrust nut off. Now we've been trying for about 2-3 months to get the front thrust nut off, and this is the front thrust nut. So this actually is threaded on the inside, and you can see the threads right here on the crankshaft, and that's it, threads onto that. But you also have this front bearing plate that sits on top of here, and the outside of this, or I'm sorry, this inside diameter here is the inner support for that thrust nut. And all of it was seized together. I mean, you can see right here, this is our #1 main bearing, and it is really, really rusted. All of these components in here were seized, and my suspicion is that the engine was stored just like this, nose up, nothing really protecting that that front bearing from intrusion of water, and then this is the result. Now, after we got, well, first of all, let me start with this. So this is, I bought this wrench. This is part number T348. You can see that right there. But this is a Jacobs Engine Company tool made specifically for this front thrust nut. So I found it on eBay. I bought it. And that's what we needed to get it off. You know, it being that it was seized to this crankshaft and the thrust bearing plate, it wasn't coming off until, you know, we got the right tool for the job. So we finally made it happen. Now, once we got the front thrust nut off, that's this. We had to get all the nuts and washers off. We pulled the front thrust bearing plate. Underneath that was a shim, a little spacer, so we'll get that cleaned up. We'll probably reuse it because this engine isn't going on wing. We'll just be there for, you know, the sake of being a complete engine. Underneath that was this little component, and this is our Crankshaft Oil Slinger. And essentially all this does is there's oil. So if you look on the front of the case, there's a little hole right there. And what that allows is oil into this front bearing compartment. And this sits on here like this, and essentially that oil stream hits this. You see how it's angled. It hits it on the side, and it slings oil to the outside of the compartment and allows that bearing to be lubricated. And then also we had a front thrust bearing plate spacer that we had to get removed. So I've already cleaned this part up. It was a lot of corrosion on it. I took it to the parts washer, cleaned it up, tagged it. All this stuff is, you know, we still got to strip the paint off of these aluminum components, and I need to do some better cleaning of all these other components because it's not going back on like this. I will clean this up and get it looking presentable so it can be reinstalled onto the engine. But after that, we worked for about an hour trying to separate the front nose case from this front half of the main crankcase. And you can see we took a scribe and we broke the oil seal all the way around. We tried various things. So we had to remove these nuts and washers all the way around the case. We tried various methods to get this case separated, and it didn't happen today. You know, it's like that with this sometimes. You know, we're a small shop. We don't have all of the right tools, so we have to get pretty creative with how we're doing some of this. So the next step really is, once we get this front case off, this nose case, you know, we're gonna have to disassemble the case. We have to pull all these tappet guides here all the way around the case. But once the case comes off, we'll actually disassemble the crankshaft. The crankshaft is in two sections. You can kind of see inside here, pull this my way some. See the crankshaft moving in here. So this is the master rod that I'm pulling on right here. Our crankshaft, once we get that bolt and nut removed right there, loosen that clamp, this front half of the crankshaft actually comes off. But of course, you know, we do have to wait till we remove our nose case before we can do that. So unfortunately, you know, we made some progress. We finally got the thrust nut off. That was the biggest obstacle. That's done. I've soaked this front bearing, this rusty front bearing, and WD-40 penetrating oil, and hopefully that'll loosen some of this up so the case won't be so difficult to come off. You know, other than that, that's kind of what we're working on. And again, once we get the front case, the crankshaft, then it's really just a matter of the rear crankshaft and the accessory case, getting all that removed from the engine mount so we can get a display stand welded together for this engine for when we give it back to the museum. So anyway, that's it right now. Check in next week and we should have another video.